Not all microbes fit the simple models we've used so far. Some challenge how we define complexity, treatment strategies, and even what it means to be a microbe. Hi, and welcome back to my channel, Learning Biology with Dr. Vanessa, where I take difficult biological concepts and make them easy to understand. Today, we're stepping beyond bacteria and archaea and into the world of eukaryotic microbes, the cells that are much more like our own. Not all eukaryotes fall under microbiology. Microbiologists focus mostly on protozoa, microscopic algae, fungi, and helminths, since they are the eukaryotes most relevant to health, disease, and environmental processes. And since the majority of algae don't infect humans, our focus today will be on the other three: fungi, protozoa, and helminths. These organisms are larger, more structurally advanced, and often more physiologically similar to us than bacteria, which makes them fascinating. But their similarity to human cells also makes them clinically challenging to treat. Eukaryotic cells are complex, compartmentalized, and highly organized, which makes them very different in comparison to prokaryotes. Eukaryotic cells have a true nucleus where their DNA is stored, wrapped around histone proteins, and enclosed by a nuclear envelope, compared to prokaryotic cells, which have their genetic material freely inside an area called the nucleoid, not enclosed by a membrane. Eukaryotic cells also consist of membrane-bound organelles, the mitochondria, powering metabolism with ATP production, Golgi bodies, packaging and shipping proteins, and a rough endoplasmic reticulum studded with ribosomes to build those proteins in the first place are just a few examples of these organelles. Since eukaryotic cells are more complex and filled with membrane-bound organelles, they take longer to replicate than prokaryotic cells. Prokaryotic cells have access to all the components within their cytoplasm, not membrane-bound, so they can replicate much more quickly. Fungi include molds, yeast, and mushrooms, although in medical microbiology, we mainly focus on the first two. Fungi can exist in several forms, ranging from unicellular to colonial and even multicellular, as we see in mushrooms and puffballs. Microscopic fungi cells are commonly found as either yeasts or molds. Yeasts are unicellular, oval-shaped cells that reproduce asexually by a process called budding. Budding is really just as it sounds. It's where a new organism grows as an outgrowth from the parent's body, eventually detaching to become a separate, genetically identical individual. Molds grow as long, thread-like structures called hyphae that form a visible network called a mycelium. Some yeasts also form structures called pseudohyphae, where budding cells remain attached in chains rather than separating completely. While many fungal cells exist only as yeasts and some as hyphae, few can be dimorphic, meaning they can switch between these forms depending on environmental conditions. Several fungi that cause human disease are dimorphic. About 300 species of fungi are known to cause disease in humans. A fungal infection is referred to as a mycosis. Fungi can cause infection in two ways. Some act as primary pathogens, meaning they are capable of infecting an otherwise healthy individual. Others cause opportunistic infections, taking advantage of weakened immune systems, such as in patients who are immunocompromised due to illness, medications, or medical treatments. Treating fungal infections can be difficult because fungal cells resemble ours. This means antifungal drugs must target features unique to fungi without harming human tissue. Fungi cannot make their own food like plants do, and they don't ingest food like animals or humans. Instead, they are heterotrophic, which means they absorb nutrients from their environment. Fungal cells secrete digestive enzymes into their surroundings, and this breaks down the organic substrates that are outside of the cell. The smaller molecules that result such as sugars, amino acids, and fatty acids, are then absorbed into the cell across the fungal cell wall and membrane. Many fungi are saprobes, meaning they feed on dead or decaying organic matter. This is why fungi play such an important role in decomposition and nutrient recycling in ecosystems. Other fungi are parasitic, which means they obtain their nutrients from a living host. This can be plants or animals. When it occurs in humans, it can result in a fungal infection, as I mentioned before, that's called mycosis. From a medical perspective, fungal nutrition also helps explain how antifungal drugs work. Remember our unique problem that fungal cells are also eukaryotic like our own? Since fungi rely on enzymes and unique cellular structures like their chitin-containing cell walls and ergosterol-rich membranes, many antifungal medications are designed to interfere with nutrient absorption or membrane integrity without harming human cells. When fungal cells reproduce, their hyphae form specialized reproductive bodies called spores. These spores are lightweight, easily spread through the air, and resistant to environmental stress. They can be inhaled, land on the skin, or contaminate wounds, leading to infection. Once the spore lands in a favorable substrate, it can quickly germinate and grow into a new fungal colony. Fungal spores are reproductive. They are how fungi make more of themselves. This is very different from the bacterial endospores that we spoke about before. Bacterial endospores are non-reproductive survival structures. The ability of fungi to produce spores helps explain why fungal infections can be persistent, recurrent, or difficult to eliminate, and why infection often occurs through environmental exposure rather than direct person-to-person transmission. Most protozoa are harmless, free-living organisms found in water and soil, but a number are important human pathogens responsible for hundreds of millions of infections each year. Protozoa are unicellular eukaryotes, meaning each one is a complete cell with a true nucleus and membrane-bound organelles. Their cytoplasm is often organized into two regions, a clear outer layer called the ectoplasm, which plays a role in movement, feeding, and protection, and a denser inner region, the endoplasm, that carries out most cellular activities. Because they lack a rigid cell wall, protozoa are flexible, which allows them to change shape and move efficiently through their environment. Protozoa move using pseudopods or false feet, flagella, or cilia, depending on the species. Protozoa, like fungi, are heterotrophs. As a reminder, this means that they get their nutrients by consuming other organisms or organic material. Many feed by engulfing bacteria, algae, or debris through a process called phagocytosis, while parasitic protozoa take their nutrients directly from their host tissues or fluids. They can live in a wide range of environments, from freshwater and oceans to moist soil. But moisture is usually the key factor that limits their growth. You won't find them in dry areas. Some species are even tough enough to survive extreme temperatures or pH. Protozoa often have life cycles that shift between different stages, depending on the species and the environment. Many exist in an active feeding form called a trophozoite. Some can also enter a dormant resistant form known as a cyst. The cyst allows the organism to survive harsh conditions and plays a major role in transmission. When the cyst enters a more favorable environment, one with moisture and nutrients, it breaks open and releases the active trophozoite. Not all protozoa form cysts. Some remain only in the trophozoite stage, while others can switch back and forth between trophozoite and cyst depending on conditions. For example, Trichomonas vaginalis, a common sexually transmitted protozoan, does not form cysts and must be spread through direct intimate contact. In contrast, Entamoeba histolytica and Giardia lamblia do form cysts, which is why they are easily transmitted through contaminated food and water. Protozoa typically reproduce asexually, most often by a modified form of binary fission that uses mitosis to divide the nucleus. However, some species also undergo sexual reproduction at certain points in their life cycle. In ciliates, this occurs through a process called conjugation, where cells exchange genetic material. This genetic mixing creates new combinations that can improve survival and adaptability. Helminths are large, multicellular, parasitic eukaryotes, commonly known as parasitic worms. They're a bit unique in microbiology because, unlike bacteria or protozoa, their adult forms are often visible to the naked eye. Even so, helminths are still studied in microbiology because they are transmitted and cause disease through microscopic stages of their life cycle, specifically eggs or larvae, much like other microbes. Pathogenic helminths can be divided into two groups based on body type. Roundworms or nematodes have long, cylindrical, unsegmented bodies. Common examples include ascaris, pinworms, and hookworms. Flatworms have thin, flattened bodies that are often segmented. They are divided into two groups: tapeworms or cestodes, which are flat, long, ribbon-like worms made of segments that live in the intestines and absorb nutrients directly from their host, or they're divided into flukes or trematodes, which are flat, leaf-shaped worms that often infect organs like the liver, lungs, or blood vessels. The complete life cycle of the helminth includes the fertilized egg, larval, and adult stages. Adult helminths may exist as separate males and females, or they may be hermaphroditic, meaning a single organism has both male and female reproductive organs. One reason helminths infections can be so persistent is their remarkable reproductive capacity. Adult worms can produce hundreds of thousands of eggs per day, and a large female may contain millions of eggs at various stages of development. Transmission usually occurs when eggs or larvae are ingested through contaminated food or water, undercooked meat, soil, or insect vectors. Once inside the human body, larvae mature into adults that can survive for years while continuously producing eggs. Unlike bacteria, helminths do not multiply inside the human host. Fertilized eggs are released to the environment to find a new host. With helminths, disease severity is often related to the number of worms present and how long the infection persists. Helminths share these general life cycle features, but the path they take to reach the human host can vary. Microbiologists use specific terms to describe the role each host plays in a parasite's life. The definitive host is the organism in which the helminth reaches sexual maturity and reproduces. For many medically important helminths, humans serve as the definitive host. Some helminths also require an intermediate host, which is a different organism that harbors the parasite during its larval stage. These intermediate hosts are often animals, insects, or aquatic organisms and are essential for the parasite to complete its life cycle. In other cases, a transport host, a type of intermediate host, carries the parasite without allowing it to develop further. Not all helminths use all three types of hosts. Some have complex, multi-host life cycles, while others follow a direct life cycle involving only humans. A classic example of a helminth with a direct life cycle is the pinworm. Let's take a closer look at the pinworm life cycle to see how a parasitic worm can spread efficiently using humans as its only host. The life cycle of a pinworm begins when a person accidentally swallows microscopic pinworm eggs, usually picked up from an infected individual or from touching contaminated surfaces. Once inside the body, the eggs hatch in the intestine, releasing larvae that mature into adult worms in about 1 month. The adult worms mate, And then the female migrates out of the intestines to the area around the anus to lay her eggs. This egg laying causes intense itching. Scratching provides temporary relief, but it also spreads the infection. Eggs stick to the fingers and can be transferred to clothing, bedding, and other objects. In this way, the infected person becomes both the host and a source of continued transmission, either reinfecting themselves or spreading the eggs to others. About 50 species of parasitic helminths are known to cause disease in humans. While these infections occur all over the world, they are more common in tropical and subtropical regions. Globally, billions of people are affected each year, and they're not just a problem in developing countries. North America alone sees tens of millions of cases annually. By understanding helminths, their life cycles, how they spread, and how they affect the body, we gain insight into why prevention, hygiene, and early treatment are so critical in healthcare. These organisms may be large enough to see with the naked eye, but their impact on human health is anything but small. If you found the content of this video helpful and want to keep learning how microbes affect the body, please make sure to subscribe, give this video a like, and turn on notifications so that you never miss out on new content. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.